Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. The webinar will begin in just a second. It will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last 20 to 30 minutes to respond to the questions you post during the discussion. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed on Friday to all who registered. And we are streaming the webinar on our Facebook Live. All resources that you see shared as links in the chat will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants. And materials are accessible on GLR's Community Learning for Impact and Improvement platform, aka CLIP. We invite you to take a few seconds to create a free account if you haven't yet done so that you don't miss the bios, slides, and other materials from today's session. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Finally, before we begin, I just wanted to promote some of our upcoming webinars. Next week on September 21st, we have an exciting double header, starting with a funder to funder conversation at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Assume Collaboration, Philanthropic Opportunities for Aggregating Impact. Later that afternoon, we have another Learning Loss Recovery Challenge, The Centrality of Relationships, Tutors, Mentors, Coaches, and Parents. The following week on September 28th, we invite you to join us for our next peer exchange learning conversation, Ensuring Digital Access, How CGLR Communities are Addressing the Digital Divide. And finally, another Learning Loss Recovery Challenge at 3 p.m. with the Kindergarten Exodus, Why, Where, and What Can We Do? We'll be sure to add links in the chat to register for these sessions and more of our upcoming opportunities. Joining you now is Sarah Torian, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesday session entitled Safe, Connected, and Learning, Reengaging Young Students and Their Families, co-sponsored and co-hosted by Attendance Works, one of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading's longtime core implementation partners. The team at Attendance Works has been a critical resource for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading since the campaign's launch more than a decade ago. As the campaign has worked to mobilize nonprofit partners, educators, foundations, business leaders, and states and communities across the nation to support children in low-income families on their path to third grade reading proficiency, Attendance Works has been at our side every step of the way. Their research helped to shine a light on the importance of regular student attendance in the early grades, and more recently has helped state and community leaders across the country understand the importance of digging deeper beyond average daily attendance to identify the kids who were chronically absent, missing 10% or more of the school year, whether for excused, unexcused, or disciplinary reasons, to ensure that these kids don't fall farther behind. And as Attendance Works has helped us all understand the effects of chronic absence, they have also built a robust set of tools and resources and provided technical assistance to superintendents and community partners across the country to help them drive with data and mobilize their communities to reduce chronic absence. The whole child data-driven approach that Attendance Works supports is more important right now than ever, as schools and communities work to re-engage students and families in the midst of an ongoing pandemic that is affecting families and especially low-income families and economically disadvantaged families in many, many ways. And so it is my honor to welcome and introduce our moderator for today, Hedy Chang. Hedy is the director of Attendance Works, a national and state level initiative aimed at advancing student attendance and closing equity gaps by addressing chronic absence. Hedy has spent more than 3 decades working in the fields of family support, family economic success, education, and child development. And we are delighted to have her return to GLR Learning Tuesdays today to moderate this conversation with a group of superintendents who are leading the way in addressing chronic absence in their communities. So welcome, Hedy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for that fabulous introduction. It is truly our pleasure and our privilege to partner with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, which really was instrumental to our starting this work in the first place. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk today about why engaging our youngest students and families matter more than ever. And I'm going to set that context, and then we're going to be joined by an amazing panel of superintendents who can talk about the strategies for taking this work in operationalizing these concepts in the direct daily interactions with students and families. Next slide. But let me start by just reminding folks about why this matters so much. Prior to COVID-19, research had already shown the incredibly adverse impact of chronic early absence on young kids. This is data that you can see. The kids who showed up all the time were the kids in the green, the kids on the far left, on the far right. Those are the kids who were chronically absent in pre-K, K, and first, and by the end of 2nd grade, they were seriously at risk. Next slide. And we know that this can affect long-term outcomes. We've seen data that shows chronic absence in kindergarten can lead to lower literacy in 1st grade, lower achievement as far out as 5th grade, and even retention and suspension in middle school. Next slide. And the impact of this is the greatest for our lowest income kids, who are more likely to be chronically absent and more likely to face the kinds of major barriers that create consistent chronic absence for more than a year, because they're harder barriers to resolve and overcome. And the impact on literacy is even greater because they tend to lack the resources to make up for the time lost in learning and instruction in the classroom. Next slide. And now we know during COVID that we're likely to see even greater challenges for our youngest kids. We are hearing anecdotally from districts that chronic absence is higher. Part of that is a surge in COVID-19 cases and concerns because our youngest children don't have vaccines. At the same time, many young children have not participated in any kind of formal in-person learning experience, whether that was preschool or kindergarten, and getting into that routine of going to formal school, which can be hard in any normal year, is even more difficult with families feeling incredible anxiety about showing up to school given health concerns, and then with quarantine possibly disrupting routines as soon as they start to be established. And we also know that families are still rebuilding those informal and formal support systems that are so key to making sure young children can show up every day. Next slide, please. And we've seen, this is data from Connecticut, which has some of the highest quality data in the country. And last year already, they saw much higher levels of chronic absence in their kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, in those early grades. And that's a really troubling trend. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that this was particularly adversely affecting African-American and Latino children. And we've seen data mirrored like this in other places in the country, though Connecticut happened to release this data early on. So it's a really helpful picture of what we are likely to be seeing in other parts of the country. Next slide, please. What we know is that kids show up to school when positive conditions for learning are in place, when they feel physically and emotionally healthy and safe, when families and their children feel belonging, connection, and support, when they feel academic challenge and engagement, and they're surrounded by adults and students who support these positive conditions for learning. And relationships are essential to all of this. At this moment in time, as we reopen schools with the Delta variant surging across the country, we know many kids aren't showing up sometimes because they don't feel that physical, emotional health and safety at schools, or they may not have that connection, so they trust what's happening in schools. And it makes this work because this is for our youngest kids who are just at the beginning of their careers, even more essential. Next slide. We also know, though, the good news is that we know a lot about how to make sure kids show up and support them when they're there. That's taking a tiered approach to engagement that makes sure you have a strong relationship building foundation that then goes into universal prevention, early intervention, and intensive intervention. And you're using data throughout this process to inform how much the depth, the intensity of your supports, and to plan for how much supports you need. Next slide. This relationship-centered foundation is essential. And in many ways, what we have to do is double down with these high levels on ensuring this relationship foundation is in place. Regardless of whether kids are in person or remote, we have to use all the tools at our disposal to put this in place, to put in place positive relationships, to ensure families of physically and healthy learning environments, to make sure that families are equipped to support learning at home. And one of the things that we've seen is when chronic absence is high, it can be reason to take a look at which or whether one or more of these foundational whole school supports aren't quite in place in the way they need them to be. Next slide. And now it is my sincere pleasure to welcome our panelists. This amazing selection of superintendents. I've had the privilege of knowing them all for a number of years. Eric Gordon was appointed the CEO of the Cleveland Metropolitan School District in 2011 and has since helped lead the district in achieving an almost 24% increase in graduation rates for African American students, a nearly 29% increase for Hispanic students, and at the same time, enrollment in high quality preschool has increased by 72%, while literacy rates have grown by 4.4%. Eric, it's such a pleasure to have you here, bringing in the wisdom that you have from bringing together key stakeholders to support and make sure that equal opportunity truly exists in Cleveland, Ohio.
Thanks, Hedy. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. And we will also be joined by Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez. Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez is the superintendent of the Hartford Public Schools, where she is homegrown. She is actually grew up and graduated from the Hartford Public Schools, which is one of the things that gives her such deep insight into the realities, the conditions, the strengths, the challenges of our home community. Before assuming this role, Leslie led comprehensive improvement efforts in a network of 11 schools and was a school social worker in a local high school. Those social worker skills, I'm sure, Leslie, are coming into play more than ever as we make our way through this pandemic.
Indeed. Thank you for having me, Hedy.
Pleasure to have you. And last but certainly not least, we're going to be joined by Superintendent Wendell Waukau. And he is the superintendent for the Menominee Indian School District on the Menominee Indian Reservation in Northeast Wisconsin. He has played every role as far as I can tell. He's been a teacher, a coach, an athletic director, a dean of students, a principal, and this is also a community where Wendell was born and raised. And by implementing a variety of reforms and initiatives, the district has increased its graduation from less than 60% in 2008 to over 90%. Thank you so much, Superintendent Waukau, for joining us.
Poso, everyone, and I'm just honored to be here. And now that I actually can navigate So I just say poso in my Menominee native language, and I am honored to be here, especially with Dr. Rodriguez and Eric Gordon, and just looking forward to today's webinar.
Thank you so much. So we're going to start off with our first question. I'm going to ask Eric if we can start off with you. So we're going to ask you to tell us briefly about CMSD and its districts, so people have a picture of the milieu in which you work. And then tell us about what is your vision for learning in the coming year. And we'll start with Eric, then go to Leslie, and then go to Wendell.
Sure, thanks, Hedy, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think on the next slide, we have this brand or this logo, CMSD Experience, Get More. What I hope you'll take away is part of this is what Hedy really shared with us about a relationship-centered foundation. We have really worked to come out of the pandemic shutdown on building this experience that kids are going to have with us. And in Cleveland, we're advertising it as the Get More experience. Our vision, which is on the next slide, is demographically, I'm sorry, we are a system of about 37,000 students. We are majority minority, with 86% of our children being children of color. And we have 100 schools, 63 Ks, 36 high schools, and a smattering of other programs. What's really important to understand about Cleveland is that we have the highest childhood poverty in the nation and have had for the 15 years I've been here. We sometimes trade place for number 2 with Detroit, but deep generational poverty. We also are the single worst digitally connected major city in the country and the 9th most racially segregated city in the country. And so context matters, that this is a community that for many years has been disinvested in by the systems and structures. And of course, that has impacts on what we know from the data about attendance. But moving into our vision for learning, and we can click through the narration for this. My team and I went into this really thinking about how do we come out of the pandemic stronger than before. My team has heard, if they've heard it once, they've heard it hundreds of times, the Audre Lorde quote, that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And while I'm very proud of the many years of work I've done in Cleveland pre-pandemic, our systems across the country and across the globe were really brought to their knees. And this is a chance for us to really rethink and reinvent and be more bold. And so what you see here is, for us, it's an equity issue, that we're in pursuit of a more fair, just, and good system of education. And that we want our learners, which for us is everyone, our scholars, the students themselves, and their educators, regardless of role, should be individually and collectively engaged in academically or intellectually complex tasks. And we didn't say rigorous tasks, because rigorous is a nice educational word that we throw around it means different stuff to everyone. We said intellectually complex tasks, something you can describe very concretely. We're good at that part in K-12, but we're really less good at that task being worth the time and struggle of the student or the adult, the learner. So we want them to be worthy of their productive struggle. And we want our learners to have real, meaningful opportunities to authentically demonstrate their work and learning. Both of the academic content, did they learn reading and math and chemistry and those sorts of things, but also the transferable skills, presenting, researching, working in a group. And we want it to be fun, a joyful and adventurous environment. And so we have very carefully curated this vision as we've come out of the pandemic shutdown. We are not out of the pandemic, of course, but out of the shutdown, as really our North Star of how we want to move our community forward. And we're building on it by using 4 design elements that are on the next slide. And so to make this come to life, we really have to continue a push that we've been making in Cleveland for now over a decade to a truly competency-based education that is personalized and mastery-focused. This is particularly going to be critical for our earliest learners, many of whom didn't have a traditional 4-year-old experience or 5-year-old experience. And we have a choice to either start with a personalized approach from where they are and where they are in their unfinished learning and build on the assets they already have, or to choose the more traditional deficit strategy of where they should be on September 14th, and shame on them for not being there. And we're going to shovel content at kids instead of thinking about how to leverage their assets. Cleveland's point of view is that we have to think about where they are and building on those assets, activating things that students can succeed with, and building knowledge. The second is this notion of a school without walls and really thinking about anywhere, anytime learning. And again, this goes to our littlest learners. So all of our classrooms this year are blended classrooms so that if I'm at school during the day, my homework is no longer low-tech homework. It is inside of Seesaw or Schoology so that my kids are continually thinking about learning being accessible 24 hours out of the day. That's also helping us deal with the pandemic. If we have to have a student quarantine, they can stay connected through their Schoology or their Seesaw classroom. If we have to flip a classroom because a whole class has to quarantine, we've had one of those so far, the whole class can flip because it's the new anywhere, anytime space that they learn. The third is whole human learning and really focusing on social, emotional, cultural, and physical wellness. And here, just a couple of quick moves we've made is we have a deep investment in a social worker in every school through our Say Yes to Education program. We also are implementing a full-time health professional in every school this year so that we can say to kids and families, there's a nurse at school. You don't have to be afraid. But another part of the whole human learning is so many school districts, because of COVID safety, locked parents out of school right when they want to see that their littlest children are safe in school. And so we've actually strongly encouraged both video tours of what it looks like inside of our schools and our COVID safety protocols, and that when you come to school, that you as a parent also put on your mask, take your temperature check, provide the social distancing so you can walk your children to the classroom and see what's going on, giving you that emotional safety as a parent. And then finally, the personalized learner pathway that as our students grow should be an equitable, student-centered career development pathway that creates voice and choice and agency. And again, I would argue that that starts at a very young age. So we actually have, even in third grade, for example, well, in kindergarten, we have wonder walls where kids are actually actively thinking about their own journey and the things they want to study in the context of the standards we need them to learn. And so this gives us just a little glimpse of how we're tackling the problem. And I look forward with my colleagues to digging in deeper as we go through the webinar.
Thank you so much, Eric. That's such a fabulous vision. I love these 4 design elements as a way to guide your work forward. And Leslie, could you tell us a bit about Hartford Public Schools, the community that you're working in, and your vision for post-pandemic learning?
Absolutely. And thank you, Hedy, to you and your entire team, longtime partners with us in terms of improving our supports for our students. I will give just in the next slide a quick glance as to who it is that we are privileged to serve. So we are the 3rd largest public school district in Connecticut. And as you can see here, a diverse student population, which is a tremendous asset. And we also know that we have a complex level of need, right? We have 39 schools. We do operate within an ecosystem of school choice with 18 of our 39 schools being magnet schools, which means that we draw from, over 65 towns serving close to 18,000 students. And, the asset, as you can see here with the majority minority, as Eric referenced as well, with our Hispanic students at 55%, 29% Black, and with 85 languages spoken throughout our entire community. And, we have our students that have additional levels of need. 80% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. And you see here that 21 have learning differences, and we also serve our multilingual learners. And in our next slide, I do want to kind of contextualize, what it is that we are, as we look ahead to the rest of the school year, we had to really ground ourselves in what it is that we were learning. And so we know that our community had longstanding needs that, of course, the pandemic exacerbated. The existing gaps certainly deepened, and a new one between our in-person and our remote learners developed. And it was a challenge to provide, as many colleague superintendents know, both remote and in-person instruction. And our data showed that our remote learning did not reach the majority of our students. And I also am aware that it will take us, years to understand the full impact of the pandemic on student learning, on social and emotional skills, but we are getting an early sense, in part because though we did prioritize in-person learning last year, a large portion of our students still primarily experienced remote learning, right? So we had 59% of our students that started the year last year remotely, and 37% of them ended the year remotely. And as we look back pre-pandemic, and Hedy, you know this well, we were making great progress addressing chronic absenteeism, and the pandemic and remote learning, of course, exacerbated our challenges. And I'll give you a quick data point: 48% chronic absenteeism last year, compared to 20 to 24 in February of 2020. And as expected, the pandemic, right, interrupted student learning and some of that progress. And the learning challenges were most significant, not only for those remote learners, but for our historically marginalized student groups. And that is across the board in both literacy and in math and in engagement. So as we begin to unpack some of the summative data, we've seen participation rates clearly impacted. And we have to keep that in our line of sight, right? Those results, though they don't paint the entire picture, they give us a view into how it is that we have to strategize for next year, for this year. And then as I think about our vision and our mission in our next slide, I do want to reference that we leveraged an opportunity that we had with the influx of funding that we were receiving to recalibrate, if you will, our strategic plan. So you see that our vision still remains making sure that we provide each and every one of our students with the learning and the supports that they need to be successful when they're with us in school, but of course, right, in life. And we do want our students to be able to graduate and be prepared to transform our world. And our 4 major priorities did not change. We did engage. We had 50 hours of deep engagement with our stakeholders to develop and reimagine our strategic plan. And the priorities were still grounded. Our community said there's no need to shift our priorities because they're all in service of the whole student. And you can see our 4 priorities: high quality teaching and learning, with very specific strategies. One is still tending to what we are here to do, and Eric referenced a little bit of this, and that is making sure that we implement and that we monitor our instructional vision, providing an academic system of support that addresses the academic needs that our students have within a tiered process, and increasing our high school and post-secondary transition supports is a strategy that we heard loud and clear from our students. I won't go into all of our strategies, but I will reference one that is relevant to a lot of the conversation today, and that is ensuring that we provide the social and the emotional system of supports that is grounded in those tiered interventions that address physical as well as developmental, social needs of our youth.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And Superintendent Waukau, Wendell, I'd like to turn to you. You have a very different situation from what we have in Hartford and in Cleveland. Can you tell us more about your community and your school district and your vision for post-pandemic learning? Oh, and if you will unmute, that would be perfect.
That's a habit. I haven't mastered that yet, but thank you, Hedy. And I usually like to start about describing our school by describing our community, because schools are reflections of communities. And so, our beautiful reservation, which is the Menominee Nation, we're proud because we never left, we never moved. The federal government shrunk us, but we're still on the existing land that our ancestors started. And of course, what we like, or what we're so proud of, is this beautiful forest that we have in our 235 plus acres, and what it does for our community. and it's internationally known. We've had countries come here and see it. It's been seen in space. And I would even say, the NCAA likes it so much that I think it's 5 of the NCAA Final Four floors have come from our forest. Not to mention this year's NBA champions, the Milwaukee Bucks, that floor came from our forest. So we're proud of that. We're so proud of our culture and what we've done. And, I'm going to talk more about, this tremendous resilience that we've had over the years. But I put down this number here about being ranked 72 out of 72 Wisconsin counties in public health outcomes, because we operate now under what I call a public healthcare lens. And so these same social determinants that are impacting healthcare, they impact student achievement. Okay. And so what we did over the years is we flipped the script, and we no longer looked at truancy. We don't even talk about truancy anymore. From the eyes of the school, we looked at it from chronic absenteeism around our whole community, whether it was not just kids showing up for school. Well, what about people not showing up for their dental appointments or their doctor appointments, or maybe even work? Create a community conversation around that. So all I can say is that what's helped us is going to a public healthcare lens has really helped us engage our community. So I'll talk now maybe a little more about our children. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about our school district. We're a relatively young school district, and we were established in 1976. And it was through some of the racial tensions that was going on with the neighboring community where many of us attended school. But we have about 1,000 students. We're predominantly Native American. We're unique in that we are a public school district located on entirely Indian lands. You don't find that very often. Okay, so we have a high free and reduced, but you know what? Our school board, all the kids eat free, so we don't have to worry about the stigma. So I appreciate that. And we use this term here on this whole chronic absenteeism rate, which now, if we looked at our figures in 2018, 19, or 1920 prior to COVID, we're always close to 30%. And that's the highest out of just about any ethnic group. But when I get to talk later about what that picture looks like in our community, this makes sense to us. And this doesn't alarm me. It just helps us understand how to better respond. So again, I think I just want to say, there's a lot of uniqueness in our schools. And what I did, and I'm going to finish up here in just a couple seconds, when we said we would do when COVID impacted, we took the time to say, we're going to use this as an opportunity to redesign our schools, to re-engage our kids. And for most things we're going to stop doing things that were not working in COVID and not do them again. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will hear more as we continue. So I'm actually going to stick with you for a moment, Wendell. As you think about what you've seen in terms of the challenges, the strengths of families with, tell us more about what have you seen as the challenges and strengths of families with young children, given what happened last year. What have you seen in your community?
Well, if you pull up the mental model slide, here, this is what we engage our community in, and it's a mental model, it's a story. So when you look at the challenges, we had all these challenges going on prior to COVID, and we actually put them into data, we put them into conversations, and so we talk about our personal traumas, the historical trauma, especially the boarding school, and I think many of you have seen the developments in Canada, where we looked at trauma across generations. We added this piece here, and I'm going to talk about it. But really what I want people to understand is that one of the barriers to students attending school regularly and student achievement is trauma and ACEs. And it was back in 2012 and 13 when that perfect storm hit, when the school and the community started talking about trauma and how it made so much sense to all of us in terms of our kids and their achievement, our lack of parent involvement. But you can see here that these figures really stood out to our tribal leaders in terms of maltreatment rates, the substance abuse, and it created a conversation for someone to stand up and say, hey, enough's enough. When are we going to start changing the way we do business? When are we going to stop having punitive systems in our schools? And so again, what this did is it created over an 8-year conversation with our community where we come together as a community and we work on these social determinants to improve our health in our community. But I want to talk for a minute about COVID-19 because, you know, when we left, we were already dealing with this. In many tribal communities across the country, what COVID did is it put all of these on steroids. And basically, you know, we were dealing with unemployment, homelessness, food insecurity. So when we had to go virtual, we didn't go virtual. We decided to make sure our kids were fed. We decided to make sure we stayed engagement with our families. We decided that the best thing to do is let's make sure we can get Wi-Fi to the homes. Let's work on we had to take that time. If we would have went straight to remote learning, we would have lost our kids. So we took a different approach. And again, that was because of the uniqueness of our schools and our community. But as you can see here, we've done a lot of reform efforts, and we are about ready to re-engage in a new community engagement effort now, post our, you know, as we're entering this pandemic and trying to figure out how do you bring 200 people together through a Zoom. We're going to be starting that next month. But really what all this tells us is it helps us understand what we're dealing with. Okay, it helps understand. Again, you look at these are kids' faces. These are families. You know, this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and we're still dealing with that in our schools. But at least now we have a way to respond. And I'm going to talk more about some of the great work that's being done. But again, I think, you know, you see these are the challenges, but they don't define who we are. Our kids aren't broke. And what we know is, especially when it comes to relationships, when we can hook those kids in with caring adults, we know our kids can thrive.
Thank you so much. I'm going to now turn over to Leslie. As you look at what you've seen in Hartford, what are the kinds of challenges and strengths have you been able to observe that have occurred over the last year and maybe continuing into this current year? And let's go to the next slide.
Thank you, Hedy, for that question. And I'll share, actually, I'm going to ground my response in some of our voices in our community. When we did our deep engagement in service of recalibrating our strategic plan and really grounding our strategies, not only in what the research says work to accelerate supports for students, but also in what our community felt they needed, I wanted to highlight here some of the themes that we heard from families in not only our winter, but also our spring strategy stakeholder engagement. So you see on the left here, right, is a word cloud of responses that we received when we asked our families what they needed to be true for their child to be successful over the next 3 years. And, you know, on the right are some representative quotes from families that illuminate the major themes that we heard. So there are 5 themes. One was high quality teachers in every classroom, safe, supportive learning environments, extracurricular and enrichment activities, supporting each individual student's unique needs, and helping parents support student learning at home. And so those really informed you know, some of the work and the strategies. In terms of the challenges, again, our students in our community have those longstanding needs that were now exacerbated. And the challenge is that we may have a blind spot about student needs, mental health and wellness, the depth of those. We don't know the level of the impact of that trauma, the loss, the isolation, and how that will play out over the years. Some key issues when I think about academic and social emotional recovery for students, especially those students with a higher level of need, we have to think about, bringing all of our students, we're now bringing all of our students together. And how is it that we continue to do the outreach? Our families responded well to that outreach that was done in collaboration with our community partners to really address specific familial needs or barriers. And so we did 5,800 home visits last year, for example, not only to build those relationships, but to make sure that we were connecting families with the additional supports that they needed. Really focusing on ensuring that every student has a connection to a caring adult in our school community. And we also have to tend to the instructional work. Yes, that will come after we really focus on reestablishing those relationships among the adults and the students, but also among peers. And as I reflect on some of the strengths, so we know that last spring there was an uptick in student attendance and performance as a result of us returning to in-person learning. We saw that clearly and quickly in March. So it almost gave us an early start to our recovery. We saw significant improvements in our average daily attendance rates for students that returned in March as teachers began to resume their instructions. And we carried that approach throughout our expansion of our summer programs, where we went from 12 schools to close to 30 schools, offering those additional supports and students, again, tending to the social emotional supports so that students can get reacclimated, right, to their learning environments and begin to reestablish relationships. And so, yes, there are challenges that we know exist, but we have a great starting point, especially the voice that we were able to leverage from our families and our students that informed the strategies ahead.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And I think we're now going to shift over to Eric and ask Eric to both talk a bit about what he's seen as the challenge and strengths. And then Eric, we're going to quickly shift from that. And I realize we're trying to kind of create a dialogue across this. So we're going to then allow Eric to then talk more about what are his strategies for re-engaging, particularly our youngest students and families. And then we're going to come back and actually ask both Wendell and Leslie to also add information about what are the strategies they're particularly using to re-engage families and students, particularly our youngest learners. So let's turn over to Eric. Let's go to the next slide. Well, there's not actually a slide. Why don't we shift over to the next part? But Eric, tell us, what would you add to the nature of the challenges or the strengths that you saw among young families with young children this past year?
Well, I think I would point out the commonalities between what you heard from Superintendent Waukau and Dr. Torres-Rodriguez in their presentation and their content slides. So just like Superintendent Waukau saw, COVID exposed very explicitly how deep the disparities in many of our communities have been for a long time, and the ACEs and the trauma that has been playing out in these communities, while many of the more privileged have attempted to look away and pretend it wasn't real. And you just couldn't look away and pretend it wasn't real anymore. And so just like you heard from my colleagues, we did a lot during the shutdown to not shut down. We actually created a care plan for every family where we called and talked about their food needs, whether they had internet access, because remember, the whole world was told to stay home and get online. And the FCC called it Keep America Connected. Well, I don't know what America the FCC lived in. It wasn't Cleveland. You can't keep people connected who aren't connected. And so we spent a lot of time getting that connectivity so that people could get unemployment and could get search for jobs and do telehealth and go to school. We needed to make sure that families had a safe place for their children to be, because a lot of our families lost their jobs, but a lot others were actually the people that were required to continue to go to work as essential workers to keep places clean and things of that nature. And so with our partners, we stood up academic learning pods, but we also took it as a chance to continue to advocate and empower So our teachers literally walked our families through voter registration and through the census surveying to get our families connected, really trying to build that relationship. And I think one of the opportunities or strengths that came out of this is the new student teacher parent relationships that emerged, by that much more close look at what's actually going on in our schools now that that school is in my living room. That maybe is, I didn't know teachers did all this stuff. And also maybe, oh, that maybe teachers should do this differently. So there was a lot of aha moments there. And then Dr. Torres-Rodriguez's slide, I love that slide because it's again what I talked about is our families have come out of this expecting a different kind of experience for their children. That's what I saw when I read her slide about the quality of the teacher, the kinds of arts and extracurriculars, that whole child. And so we're seeing that too, that our families are saying, we really want our kids to have a great experience, no excuses. And, we have to keep in mind that for many of our 4 and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds now, some of them, this is their first experience in school. If I didn't send my kindergarten, which was a form of undocumented chronic absenteeism, that's not even in the data that Hedy, you shared from Connecticut, is how many kids just never came in the first place, never had 3 or 4-year-old high quality preschool, never had kindergarten, and now they are 6 years old and it's their first school experience. And families in our community are still very afraid of COVID. We are having a really hard time getting families vaccinated because of the fear of the vaccine, but it's not a political fear. They're afraid of this global health crisis. And so also the importance of nurturing our families that we can and will take good care of their children. And so I would say that, what this does really elegantly, I think, is show that pretty much wherever you are in the country, we're sharing similar challenges, which means we can craft similar learnings and responses to resolve these issues that our families are experiencing. But I think it also, just one other thing I would really point out, and I hope people didn't miss through this, it also is just an absolute anchor reminder of how much our parents love their children. And it is a full-time job to live in poverty, but that does not mean that our parents don't care every bit as people who have a lot more privilege and are able to participate in more traditional ways. And I think we saw so many times and in so many ways where our parents were actually better advocates because of the much more frequent encounters that they did have with teachers when they were connected with us at school.
Thank you so much, Eric. Really helpful, and appreciate you pulling through some of those themes. Can you tell us then, as you're moving to the new school year, how are you re-engaging our families with our youngest learners?
Yeah, so we actually started our re-engagement strategy as part of our hybrid return last spring. And again, probably not surprisingly, we saw more reluctance for returning than many others. So 30% of our students, our families kept them home for the whole year, even though we were back. But so we actually very deliberately went aggressively on re-engaging kids in our summer learning experience, where we said to our families, you're going to have opportunities for your students to finish, enrich, and engage. And so, and we were really deliberate in that finish meant finishing unfinished learning. We wanted to signal that we fully know that your child can and will learn. They just haven't finished the learning yet. Your child's not broken. We know it. And so engaging kids first in those opportunities to finish core instruction, literacy, numeracy for our youngest kids, then enrich, signaling that every child should have the opportunity to be fully immersed in really high quality, complex tasks with demonstrations of learning. We actually had 4-week projects in art, music, humanities, STEM, and a group of projects we called Love the Land, which is our nickname for Cleveland. That kids got to self-select with their parents which ones they wanted to do, and then demonstrate at the end of 4 weeks what they had learned. And we saw amazing things happen in short 4 weeks, even with our youngest learners. And then finally engage, and I saw a question in the Q&A about the role of out-of-school time providers. We really wanted that second half of the day to be opportunities for students to engage and re-engage in building friendships and networks and getting the opportunities of all those out-of-school time and extracurricular activities they hadn't had over the course of the last year. So that was kind of phase one. Then phase two was you can't get focused on their attendance if they don't re-enroll. And we knew how many of our 4- and 5-year-olds had stopped out. And so we spent a great deal of effort of really going after getting families to sign up. And Hedy, you know this, pre-pandemic, our families in Cleveland still are making the adjustment of believing deeply that preschool and kindergarten is school, that attendance matters every bit as much for preschool and kindergarten as it does for first grade. So now we've got to get families who didn't even start preschool and kindergarten back engaged. And so we've had a really aggressive campaign. Our teachers union has been a great partner where we have been phone calling, phone banking families to make sure that they are enrolled and coming to school, that we went door knocking to find them. I hired high school students to be part of our recruitment and retention team that went house to house looking for families. Our Pre-for-Cle, which is our early childhood collaborative here in Cleveland, ran preschool palooza events around the city where people could come out, get registered, get some free stuff. And so the second whole effort was you got to show up. It's that hidden chronic absenteeism that I mentioned earlier. And now that they're back, now it's about building that really strong routine muscle of being in school every day. And we have to define attendance differently because we are telling kids if you show symptoms of a flu, stay home. And this is hitting the Delta variant. Unfortunately, I have a kindergartner in the hospital right now with COVID. And so we've also defined what does attending mean? It may be attending in person at school. It may be that if you're quarantined, you're attending in your seesaw. And that's okay. And we're going to give you credit for that too. And so we're obviously very early into learning lessons about that in here the 3rd or 4th week of school. But it was a really deliberate and paced strategy to re-engage, re-enroll, and then re-attend.
Thank you, Eric. And I so appreciate your comment about redefining attendance. You can attend from anywhere. You can engage in learning from anywhere and moving out of the notion that attendance is just bricks and mortar. And I feel like what I do wish is that more places had done a little more contingency planning in case, so that if something happened this year, we would have more options other than and bricks and mortar. And I want to comment to the chat as everyone is sending healthy wishes the way of your students there. Wendell, and I know we might want to pull up your amazing graphic on this. As you think, so that's a cue to our tech support here. As you think about re-engaging young people, given the challenges that they have faced. So we're going to go down to the circles, keep going through Eric's slides, which we.
It's the medicine wheel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you're thinking about re-engaging families and students, particularly your youngest.
And thank you. And I first want to say, what Eric said about redefining attendance. Good takeaway for me to take to our attendance weekly meetings that we have in our schools. And I think just listening to Dr. Torres-Rodriguez and Eric about that whole child philosophy, which, we started back in 2014, and all these here just get redefined or revised or made new. So actually, most of you are probably familiar with a tiered support. Well, natives were circular. So we made this out of the medicine wheel, because it reflects our thinking. But really, when I think about, the challenges, or I would say the opportunities, okay, we had a chance to re-engage our families first by meeting them where they're at, okay? And how do you do that? Well, we're very fortunate. We have attendance success mentors in all of our schools. We have two at our elementary, two at our high school, one of our middle school. And these were positions that we either created or we redefined as homeschool coordinators. But these individuals, along with our other students, they are worth their weight in gold. We don't even have a truancy officer anymore because we couldn't get in the home. These individuals, they can get in the home. They can knock on the door and they can reach out and say, hey, we're here to help. We're not here to judge. And again, we talk about, how so important it is to rebuild that trust, especially during a pandemic. But some of our focuses were on going after the social emotional learning, not just with the kids, also with the adults. Okay, we gave our students, our schools, permission to develop this outdoor classroom concept. Okay, let's get the kids outside, let's get them moving. And of course, we do this daily check-in where we greet the kids every morning. Kids, especially at the elementary school, they will go in and they will actually identify where they are at that day by taking their name and dropping it on a smart board into a car. And if I'm in the front seat, I'm ready to learn. If I'm in the back seat, I put my name in the back seat. Might means, you might need to keep an eye on me. But if I drop my name in the trunk, that is a signal to my teacher that I need support. I need to be watched. And you think about all those years before, we'd wait for those kids to act out, throw a chair. And here we didn't know that there was something going on. Now we do all that up front. And again, it's basically teaching kids how their brain works. And I think what a powerful strategy for kids as they get older, because they can go home and they can also teach this to their parents. But we do work we beefed up our mental health. We added another school nurse. And I think what I want to talk about is this whole piece about restorative practices, because it really became our accountability system for behavior. And again, I'm sure many of you will know you can't suspend your way out of this. Same thing with truancy. You can't give the fines and find your way out of it. It's all got to be relational. And I think what we did is we shifted moving the consequence to the end versus the front. So sometimes they say kids got to have that immediate consequence. Well, if they haven't had a chance to process emotions, they haven't had a chance to, we make things worse. So what we've shifted is the accountability piece comes at the end when kids have an opportunity to process emotions. And what we found is that we have better response systems when we do that. Might be a little harder for the teacher, but ultimately this is what we're doing for our kids. And we talk more about not breaking rules. We talk about relationships that are harmed and repairing relationships. But this whole restorative practice piece has been powerful for us. And I'll just make one more quick comment here about this. Here we were ready to, we have a Boys and Girls Club, and we were ready to start a satellite program in our elementary school before the pandemic hit. Well, when the pandemic hit, school shut down. So we went back to this summer because we had summer school. Summer school runs half a day. Well, we developed a partnership with our Boys and Girls Club and said, okay, you come in the afternoon, bring your workers, bring your programs, and we'll let kids choose to stay all day. And they don't have to go home. Then we'll feed them and then we'll bus them home. So we're fortunate to take 25, 30 kids who came, we had close to over 200 kids in summer school. But again, opening up this partnership with your community. And, we are now ready to build this into our after school program. But I'm just amazed by when you give your schools, your principals and your staff, you give them the autonomy to come up with these types of things. I'm just so encouraged. Like I said, I understand the challenges, what we're dealing with, but when we're still graduating kids across the finish line, that fires you up.
Thank you so much. What words of wisdom about how we can support our kids in this restorative approach. And I think, Wendell, about how important that is, that your first experiences are restorative in school, because if we take a punitive approach to a 5 and 6 year old, boy, by the time they're 10, 11, 12, you're now having to undo so much damage. So really,
let me just add, because I think this could refer to everyone here. Sometimes we send kids home and we make things worse. And it's better to keep them in school and work with them to get them ready to work with the home.
Really helpful. Thank you so much. Leslie, I want to turn to you. These are, by the way, resources that are on the slide so that you'll be able to look at that. But I want to, let's go. I actually, there may not be a slide on here, so let's turn off the slides. Leslie, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but tell us more about how are you specifically re-engaging your youngest learners and their families and making sure they're coming back to school this year in the Hartford Public Schools?
Well, one thing that I want to ground the responses in some of the equity-focused strategy development work that we did. And it was really important for us to think about, as we re-engage, as we develop strategy, where's the equity lens in our process and in our resource allocation? Because again, as I referenced before, we were really leveraging the opportunity that we had with the additional recovery funds. And so from a process perspective, and I think there are some folks that are school level leaders and central office representatives as well. So I'll just give a few examples there as well. In terms of the process for how we develop the strategies to re-engage, right? The stakeholder voice and data did shape because we wanted to bring those closest to the impact, closer to our decision-making and planning. And so at the system level, at a student level, for example, we use our early warning indicator data to group our students into tiers, which we heard before from our colleagues here, for targeted intervention and supports. We also focused on key grades and as we thought about long-term student success. And so many of our additional supports are targeted for K through third, and then 9th and 10th grade. At the school level, we also used state accountability data to tier our schools to bring additional school-wide supports for schools with students that had the highest needs, and also from a very specific lens around chronic absenteeism. The strategies themselves, and there is a slide if you can pull it up, but I'll just give you the highlights. Some of the ideas and the strategies in terms of re-engaging is really to focus on what we call our must wins, and that is expanding learning time and targeted supports, especially in those early grades. And that is opportunities inside and outside of the school day, from learning through summer school, intersessions. We're adding learning opportunities and enrichment opportunities through our winter and vacation intersessions, Saturdays, evening opportunities for our high schoolers, increasing supports. I know the question, Hedy, was around students, but we know that in order to support our students, we have to support our adults to support our students. So there are targeted supports for our adults, especially around what does it mean to have a trauma sensitive, a trauma responsive learning environment? What does it mean to have a restorative approach that is outside of the discipline, the student discipline realm? How is it that we can be restorative in our day-to-day interactions? And we really are also focused on identifying support in terms of staff for those earlier grades. And so we are supporting by adding stipends, for example, for teachers that would like to support at the lower grades. So we're trying to address it from multiple perspectives. But one thing that I want to emphasize is it is not new work for us to really do this work in partnership with our community partners. Our community-based organizations have been at the center of our work since before the pandemic. And so it is really an opportunity now for us to deepen and expand that work and really have an opportunity to work across systems, not just across schools, right? So that they can learn from one another, but with our larger, broader partners in our community as well. Our local health department, our local our hospitals that serve students and meeting their not only physical, but the mental health needs as well. And of course, our partners at the local city level, government level as well.
Thank you, Leslie. This is so helpful. I'm glad you reminded us to bring up this fabulous visual. I have a question. What about partnerships with the early care providers? What does that look like, given, especially given what's happened over the pandemic?
In our context, I do sit, I'm the co-chair of the Mayor's Cabinet for Young Children. And while we don't all serve our youngest learners in Hartford Public Schools, we do serve many of our pre-K 3s and pre-K 4s, but we know that there's a whole world right before they get to us. And so this is why it's so important for us to align in our efforts. And, we do share strategies for re-engaging our families. We know, as it was referenced before, that the first experience, the first school experience, many of our younger learners did miss. We saw in our enrollment data at that lower grade pre-K, of course, decreased significantly for us. And so it is so important now to really begin to expand those partnerships as to what does it mean, to build capacity and understanding in some of our families around what's the definition of a chronically absent student, and what are those reasons why, and how can we support them? So I think that the partnership at an even earlier stance is so much more important now with our community partners.
Thank you so much. And maybe what we'll do is switch into dialogue mode and maybe take down the slides, but have all our panelists up. And I'm gonna both talk about some of the questions that are now coming up in the Q&A. One of the questions, which I think is building off what you just talked about, Leslie, is what are specific strategies used to engage families in support of their students' academic development? Maybe you can share a little bit if there's specific ones in Hartford, and then I'd actually love to see if Wendell, Eric have others from their community experiences, but those specific strategies for really engaging families in their kids' academic development.
One of the things that we learned is that our families did want to participate in the opportunities that we were offering because they were remote. Right. So this is an opportunity for us to connect with our families with a very different structure. We have learned that building capacity in families around early literacy, what does that mean? And doing that with our partners. We know that our families interact with partners in a different way. And so when we partner with our United Way, for example, when we partner with our local Boys and Girls Club, they're able to expand on those strategies for, how do you ask key questions when students are reading? What does it mean? What does phonics mean? What does it mean to ask a 3-year-old to share a story, and modeling that from not only us at the schools, but with our community partners. Our faith leaders, for example, are such partners with us, where we get together with our entire core of faith leaders, and in their service, there's a time in which they pause and they talk about Hartford Public Schools, or reminders to everyone, this is what chronic absenteeism mean, and this is why it's so important for literacy and staying on track throughout the grades. So leveraging partners in a way that families not only hear the information, but experience it in other settings as well.
Thank you. Your comment, though, about the literacy makes me remember that there is actually some research that showed that if you do 2-generation approaches to literacy, so you're building parents' literacy skills, it actually improved attendance of their kids. And I think there's a lot to be thought about when we invest in these 2-gen approaches. Eric, are there particular strategies for engaging families that you would want to add into the mix?
Yeah, so I would build it again on what Leslie shared is, so we have a fundamental belief of you start where families are, and then you invite them to move forward. And so, we also found a huge benefit of parents who felt increasingly comfortable with having virtual conferences. And so our parent-teacher conferences are coming up here next week, and all of our schools are offering both in-person or virtual conferences. And that last year when we were in remote, teachers were saying to us, why do we have to have it on just a single day when we're having so much more interaction? So just creating a new dialogue and a new relationship has been so critically important. We also have done a lot to get books into homes. So every distribution of any resource we had also came with books. So we had a partnership with First Book and the Cleveland Schools Book Fund, that everything came with an opportunity to read another book home, and really populating that library, the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, getting kids signed up for that and that sort of thing. We did we did a 2-generation programming, and I saw in the Q&A, one of our colleagues in Florida that has grandparents half the year that gives you that 3-generation opportunity. But we did things that our parents maybe don't get access to without a little extra support. So we had art teachers who were teaching art and sips, where we had sparkling cider, and the students and the parents were learning to paint something, and they were using it as a social emotional reflection so that they could express themselves through an art lesson while sipping that sparkling cider like you might do in the suburbs with a glass of wine, right? The demonstrations of learning that I talked about earlier, inviting families in to see what their children did and to have their children talk with them, and empowering preschoolers and kindergartners to explain not only what they did, but what skill they were activating, and starting to put language to the word of collaborating because I worked with my friends, or I didn't give up, which my teacher told me is growth mindset, and having that conversation. So really trying to start with things that are easy for parents to access by the assets and skills they already bring, just being a person and a parent, and then moving it into more specific opportunities for parents to choose to lean in further. And so we have invested pre-COVID and are investing again post-COVID in academic parent-teacher teams, where parent conferences for youngest children are not only about, how is my child doing, but what is the enduring skill that the teacher's teaching right now? And I'm here learning it so that I can take it home and practice it with my child. We have a partnership with our community college called Parent University that we actually give our parents college credit on a transcript as an elective credit, coursework for building their parenting skills, and it creates access for them to start pursuing a certificate or a 2-year degree. So starting from what parents can activate through their already owned assets, and then creating access to opportunities to invite them to new spaces as learners as they become comfortable with the relationship they have, I would say is kind of our larger strategy, and those are some specifics of it.
Great. Wendell, I don't know if you want to add anything to this, but you can. And then I'm going to lob another question for you to answer, because I know you mentioned the digital divide issues. And one of the questions in the chat was, so how are you addressing the digital divide when families don't have access? And then it even limits the ability of students to have the other resources to make up for what's been lost in instructional time. So first, why don't you do anything if the quick around the family engagement strategies, but I'd also love to make sure that we get to the digital divide question.
Okay, we are ready to launch, hopefully by October, a COVID testing program right in our schools, rapid testing, take-home kits with our school nurse and our tribal health clinic. And we kind of mirrored that on the concept of our dental chairs in our school and our optical, where kids can get those services, especially for the little ones who aren't vaccinated. But we think that's going to help send a really strong message about keeping kids safe, that, hey, we're here, we can test, we can send kids home, and we're excited about that.
And just so I can draw the connection, for you, it means if you want to engage families, we first have to address their health and safety concerns. And unless you can visibly do that, you're not going to re-engage them in school. Exactly. I just want to, I'm now realizing that's why you went to that strategy.
Exactly. And I always say, one of the things I've learned is with our families will always come together for a purpose and a project. And sometimes you throw food in there, like we have our Title I reading nights. We do real well when we bring family in. We have a meal, we have an activity, we have strategies for families. So again, I always think about anything we do, if you can turn it into a purpose and a project, you have an opportunity to engage families. So I think the question came up about the digital divide, is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we what we did with a lot of our ESSER dollars is we went out and we made sure that there was a Chromebook for a kid at home and one at school. We also then went out and made sure we bought enough hotspots to get out into the community. We actually would take food out into the community. We would have hotspots on our buses. Some of our success mentors would actually take a hotspot and go right to a house and have a child come out and be able to access Wi-Fi. I mean, we just do things. I don't know. We don't have any limits. Okay, but one of the nice things is our tribal leaders have started to lay Wi-Fi now across broadband in our reservation, and that process is happening. Now, we'd like it to happen sooner, but at some point, our Wi-Fi access for our families is really going to take a significant bump. I think that's only part of it. If you don't take the time to teach parents how to utilize Google Classroom or some of the other types of platforms, it makes no sense to send a computer home. So that was one of the reasons why we were reluctant to send it home right away is, we have parents dealing with a pandemic, and all of a sudden, some of these parents are grandparents. And, we're going to send that to the grandparents and say, oh, by the way, I want you to log on to Johnny's Google Classroom. We can't do that. We just couldn't do that. So again, I like the progress we're making. I think that's going to be a continual challenge that, especially in rural communities, not just Indian reservations. But I am glad to see that we're making significant strides in that area.
Yeah, Hedy, if I could build on that. So it's the rural communities and the urban communities should really unite here. We have the same problems. And so Cleveland has one of the, as I mentioned, the single worst major connectivity of any major city. We made a bet, and we made it for a couple of reasons. So we're not only providing the hotspots, but we're actually helping families get permanently connected through a partnership with a local nonprofit that our community created called Digital C. And then we have managed to create a partnership with Charter Spectrum to get permanent internet into our homes and apartments. But we are actually paying the bill. And we are saying to students and families, one of the parts of the experience you have is that while you have a student in CMSD, you will have internet access paid by the district. And it's part of our re-engagement and a retention program. And we're using ESSER funds to do it, to say that we have to get families reconnected. They get a bill. It shows how much it costs. It shows credit by CMSD and a zero balance so that we're building the muscle. And our goal is, obviously short-term retention and re-engagement of our kids and families, but also long-term to put the pressure on the infrastructure people at the city, county, and state level to fix this problem and make internet a public utility. The irony is in the 1919 Spanish flu, what came out of that was a public utility called electricity, where everybody got it. We have to make this a public utility and not a luxury. But the other thing we're doing is by going to one-to-one technology, which candidly, I never could find a path to, and I don't, you know me, Hedy, I don't believe in a no-win situation. We have 97,000 devices sitting on desks throughout the district for 36,000 kids and 7,000 adults. By getting to one-to-one and harvesting out the 4 computers in every classroom, the lab that's sitting there stationary, we're actually partnering with a group called PCs for People to refurbish those computers and give them to families so that the kid has the device they're using, but over time, our families will have a device that, again, creates that positive pressure to say that we're just not satisfied with living on cell phones and mobile technology is the only access we have anymore. We demand that my computer can be plugged into my home on permanent technology. So schools schools should not be wearing this problem. And a lot of people keep trying to make this a school problem, but we can actually be really smart and strategic at creating leverage that forces our larger communities like a Cleveland to really bear down on there must be a solution. Schools are the beginning, kids are a beginning, but what about the senior citizens that aren't connected or other people without children that aren't connected, that once the infrastructure is there, we can create a larger pressure point. So there's a lot of opportunity from both the rural communities, and Ohio is one of those quirky places where we have as many urban centers as we have rural. That should be a place we unite and really lay pressure on these resources that are available to finally connect our state and our country permanently, and not in this more privileged way that we've enjoyed in the past, frankly, 20 years.
Thank you so much. Leslie, anything to add to this?
I think just the advocacy piece, Eric, you hit it right. You were spot on. And in Connecticut, we were fortunate to have early on an opportunity to advocate, because we in school district did not feel that it was fair that we had to solve for that, as you're saying, Eric. So we're in a better place. And now I think the improvement, the opportunity that we have is to continue to build capacity in our families in order to, right? And that's what our families were asking for.
I want to shift to another key issue. The pandemic has been incredibly hard on our teachers who've had to pivot and switch and change. I mean, this is, really an enormous challenge. At the same time, we also know that it's been incredibly difficult when places have unions, negotiating new responsibilities. How have you engaged unions? If you have unions, I realize that Wendell does not have a union on his, but how have you engaged your teachers so that they are truly partners and stakeholders? What's been involved in being able to make that happen in these incredibly challenging times?
I can share a few examples. So we have 12 unions, of course, our teachers union, and then all the other unions. And the communication has been key, making sure that it is recurring, that it happens in a way that is accessible, that we do our town halls with staff so that there's interaction with myself and my entire team. That was especially a key move during the pandemic. And then, responding to their needs when they give us information, making sure that we are explicit as to how did we hear the information and how is it showing up in our response and in our strategy. So from the Be Well initiative that we launched to support teachers with their own mental health and wellness, to our opportunities for Wednesdays. Last year we had Wednesdays and we needed to have a half day on Wednesday so that we can have time to do the extra cleaning. And so that meant that teachers could work from home on Wednesdays when it was a remote day for everyone. What happened this year is that we're now saying we're going to use that time to have opportunities for teachers to collaborate with one another, because that also, right, is a way to address the needs that they have. And so now every Wednesday is a half day. So I think we can go about that, Hedy, from many different ways to not only support them professionally, but also in terms of their wellness and the other supports that they need.
Eric?
So I would say communication was absolutely critically important. And so I have 9 labor unions and a principal association, so nearly the same as Leslie. And I would say that our communication was really clear and consistent across our network, and that we used a strategy that I think paid off really well. So every single message that we put out, whether it was internal or external, had underlying it deliberate, calm, and bounded optimism. So every message was designed to convey, it's going to be okay, and here's what we're going to do. Even when I didn't know what we were going to do, even when I didn't know if it was going to be okay, the message said, it's going to be okay, and here's what we're going to do. And people really responded positively to that in our community and gave us space and grace in the district, our employees, our educators, and in our community. So I think that was really important. We also really collaboratively designed all of the solutions. So, we got plunged into no tech remote because we weren't one-to-one. We were the worst connected city. So we were printing and mailing lessons. We were broadcasting lessons on a local television station. We had teachers teaching on Instagram. And so we really collaboratively designed our responses throughout the period. I think another smart move we made, and it was a big gamble, is we did not riff or lay off any of our employees. Lots of people around us did. And we were if we hadn't passed a tax issue last November in the height of the pandemic, we were bankrupt. So it would have been so easy and so smart for us to cut bait on payroll. We didn't, and our employees watched so many of their peers lose their jobs. And I think that built some loyalty back. And then finally, we spent a lot of time with the vision work that I was talking about. And so, you know, our union president put out a member message last May saying, you know, when we got shut down, we went into no tech and we figured it out. And then when we came out of summer, we went into the high tech remote and we figured it out. And then remote and then hybrid happened and we figured it out. And so now we're going to go into a new school year. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know it's not going to look like last year. That's her quote. And she said, and we'll figure it out. But this time we get to have fun doing it. And so like the summer experience that I told you about, we put out a innovative learning accelerator, essentially a grant, and said, we know that you educators did amazing things through this pandemic. We don't know what they are. So we will pay you to do them again and show us what we learned. We got 100 applications in a 1-week window, 80 of which we funded and teachers taught in the summer. And all summer long, we kept hearing, we're going to get to keep doing this, right? And so just last week, we announced the first micro projects for the in-year Enrich, the first set of communities of practice, teachers leading teachers to build their own projects. And next week, the next round of accelerators coming out. So really trying to build on why did we go into this profession in the first place? And I will tell you, I think we have evidence for it. So we know that there is a national crisis of people leaving the education field. I have the lowest attrition I've had in 3 years. And that, I would argue, is because of a really deliberate effort to re-inspire why did we come into this work. And particularly in my case, and I know in Leslie's case, and I think differently, but equally important, for Wendell, is why we chose to do it where we're doing it, where it matters most, with kids and families who have not had all of the resources and supports and equity that they have been well deserving. And I think that our communities responded really well to, if not us, then who?
Thank you so much. We are about running out of time. I don't know, Wendell, if you want to take 1 minute and offer any thoughts, and then I'm going to offer it over to Sarah, but we're just acknowledging the time.
Yeah, and I'll echo what Eric and Leslie said. Is the last thing we wanted our teachers to worry about was where their paychecks were coming from or whether they were going to have a job the next year. We didn't lay anybody off. We made sure they had raises. Biggest thing is we were flexible with their time. You know, some of these teachers were affected, their families were affected by the pandemic. They had children. So I think we really made sure that we gave them that flexibility. Now, granted, we don't have a union, but our teachers have no problem speaking up, Eric and Leslie. So I get to hear, but I think really that hold back to that self-care. We're doing more self-care for our staff now. We're getting ready to put more of our wellness and workout equipment into our schools because, you know, we want people to take care of themselves because, you know, we know the teachers are the variable. So we got to take care of the teachers because they take care of the kids.
Well said. And on that note, I'm going to shift it over to Sarah.
Wendell started his response to that question with the last thing he wanted to do. The last thing I want to do is stop this conversation, but we are at our 90-minute time limit. And I really do hope that our panelists have a moment to look in the chat box because there is just a flurry of kudos coming your way for taking the time to join us today and share these amazing insights. Huge thank you on my behalf and on the behalf of the campaign to our panel today. Thank you to Hedy Chang, to Wendell Waukau, to Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez, and to Eric Gordon for joining us today and sharing all of these concrete strategies, but also amazing insights. It's really been helpful and inspirational to me and to a lot of folks who are listening in today. Also, quickly, where did the slides go? Here they come. Just wanted to remind everybody about some of the amazing sessions that we've got planned for the coming weeks. We've got the remainder of September right here, but we've got a lot more scheduled incoming in October as well. I just posted registration links in the chat box for these 4 upcoming sessions. So I hope you'll take a moment to register and join us for more of those. Until then, thank you for joining us today. Thank you again to our panel, and I look forward to seeing all of you in more GLR Learning Tuesday sessions in the future. Until then, be well, take care. Bye-bye.